Now, no one's quite certain how my next group came into being. According to one account, it was Stalin himself who asked a small band of military singers to relocate to Moscow back in 1928 and form what we now know as the Red Army Choir. 90-odd years later, it's still setting choral standards, the envy of every fighting force out there. A thumping good march there by Vasily Solovyov-Sedoy, one of the very best Soviet songwriters. Let's Go, performed by the Red Army Choir. For all the 9 decades of history accumulated by the group, there are still amazingly few people who know much about it. But I'm glad to say we do have 2 fans on the line. From London, film historian and Soviet commentator John Riley, and in our Harrogate studio, Linda O'Carroll, self-confessed Red Army Choir groupie. And why not? Welcome to you both.
Hi.
Linda, I've been calling them the Red Army Choir, but I should in fact be calling them something else, shouldn't I?
Well, they have a very long Russian name, which I can't pronounce, not speaking Russian, but they're known as the Alexandrov Ensemble. Over here, they're known as the Red Army Choir. That is their official outside Russia touring name. Other groups have attempted to use it. There is a lawsuit going on at the moment, but this is the original Red Army Choir, started in 1928. This is the one.
But they're more than a choir. They're also founded to include instrumentalists as well, yeah?
Instrumentalists, dancers. When they came over in 1963, the Times critics were confounded. They didn't know whether to laugh or fall at their feet. They're neither a circus nor an opera, something in between. They are their own thing. They laughed at the balalaikas, but they they were on their knees at the soloists. They said they were world-class soloists who would be welcome on any operatic stage in Europe.
And I gather you've never actually heard them live, but very, very nearly did in the late 80s. So what happened there?
Well, that was the year 88, just before the wall fell down. There was a money problem, there were various problems. They brought hundreds of people over here in 88. 25, as I understand it, defected. The rest were sent home. Another group was sent around. I went to Leicester thinking to hear the Red Army Choir and saw somebody else. So, yes, I was disappointed.
John, what was it that first grabbed you about the choir then?
Well, I suppose the thing is that they are almost a kind of a quintessence of a Russian sound, and also the way that they were used, I suppose, as part of the Russian marketing, in a sense. They were part of the marketing of the Soviet state. I mean, one of the things about the choir is the fantastic discipline. They do this trick where they continue singing while the conductor leaves the stage.
Right.
It's cast iron discipline.
Linda, you mentioned earlier the quality of the voices also. What I love is testosterone fueled one moment and then sweet sounding the next.
Yes, well, they were very versatile. They would, perhaps one of the revolutionary songs, for example, where they go lullaby, yell, lullaby in form. Boris Alexandrov, who ran the choir between 46 and 87, would run the pieces like this, and would start a revolutionary song very softly with the head voice, a little like the young man who sang Snowman.
Never heard of him.
Walking in the air. And then in the middle, they would yell almost like a football crowd. And at the end, they would be back to this lullaby sound again. So they would seduce you, terrify you, and seduce you again.
The Echelon song there, a revolutionary anthem composed by the founding director of the Red Army Choir, Alexandrov. Linda, it sounded like we were on a train journey.
Yes, that was part of the Who Can Make the Trainiest Track competition of the 30s to the 50s. You may remember Dave Brubeck with his Take the A Train. This was one of them, but with people.
Amazing sound.
It is not only amazing, they have the sound of the train with the drum brushes underneath, but also in English. We think the English Echelon song sounds like a marching song. It certainly is not. If you try to march in time with the double bass, you fall over somewhere in the middle.
Well, more from the choir, indeed my guests, in just a moment. But first, what was it like to actually be a member of the Alexandrov Ensemble? Leonid Kharitonov is a legend of the Russian singing world. He joined the choir back in 1953 and saw his career transformed 12 years later when he appeared as soloist for a historic performance at the Kremlin in front of President Brezhnev and the party hierarchy. It's a moment he remembers to this day.
Но тот день, когда я выступал во дворце съездов,
that day, when I performed in the Palace of Congresses, it was a so-called government concert dedicated to Lenin's 95th birthday. But 10 days earlier, there had been another government concert dedicated to the Cosmonautics Day, the day of Yuri Gagarin's first manned space flight. The government, with Brezhnev at its head, didn't like something that we did, and the USSR Minister of Culture, Furtsova, told us that if in those 10 days we didn't come up with something truly extraordinary, something really worthy of the government concert for such an anniversary, we could be disbanded and a new ensemble would be formed. Of course, Alexandrov was very worried.
Я не знаю, каким-то образом, ни с того, ни с сего.
I don't know why, but suddenly, out of the blue, I was summoned from the choir. My tutor tells me, let's sing something for Alexandrov. And I wasn't aware of the situation at all. What should I sing? I don't know. So Alexandrov called us in and asked me to show him something. So I sang a traditional song about Stepan Razin. We rehearsed a bit, less than a week, and I had, for the first time, to step out of the choir and sing before this mighty gathering of the entire Soviet Bomon. Of course, I was nervous. But then I thought, okay, I've been in the choir for 12 years now, and if I don't sing as I should now, I will probably stay in the choir for the rest of my life. I pulled myself together, threw away my fear, went up to the microphone, looked at Alexandrov, he gave a powerful intro, and I started to sing. There's a cliff on the Volga.
Смотрел на Александрова, он дал мощное вступление, и я запел «Есть на Волге утес».
Есть на Волге утес, диким мохом оброс, он с вершины до самого края.
Ну, в конце я буду говорить о четвертом куплете, потому что все шло хорошо. В конце я решил, нота там фа у баса.
Everything was going smoothly. But in the fourth verse, by the end of the song, there's an F, which I decided to stretch a bit longer, and it overlapped with the choir. And suddenly, the entire room exploded. Applause, screams, shouts. Brezhnev rose to his feet, came up to me from his front row, shook my hand and said, "Well done." And when I was going backstage, I turned to look at him again, and I saw that he was wiping his tears. I was kind of surprised. What's there in the cliff to cry about?
А за кулисами меня встречает Климент Ефремович Ворошилов.
And backstage, Clement Efremovich Voroshilov, our marshal and revolutionary legend, was waiting for me. He hugged me and said, "If only Yosif Vissarionovich Stalin was here, tomorrow he would be awarded the People's Artist of the USSR, the highest title for actors and artists. I didn't get the title, but I did become famous overnight. People greeted me in the street. Everybody called me to congratulate, even from the conservatoire. It was a real avalanche, which of course I had not expected. And that's when I really became a soloist.
И, в общем-то, с тех пор я стал солистом.
Wow, the voice of Leonid Kharitonov with that electrifying performance of The Cliff. John, amazing to hear such a personal account of singing with the choir, and a sense of how important the ensemble was to the Soviet state as a whole as well.
It was a very important organisation, as it was. They were really artistic ambassadors in a sense. They went on tours. And then, of course, in later years, their recordings appeared on Western labels like EMI and Columbia. And they're really kind of, I think the repertoire, they chose songs from different eras and from different republics. So I think in all of those ways, it was really a reflection, perhaps, of what the Soviet Union wanted to be.
Linda, interesting how soloists have always played a key role with the group, and I think you've picked out another track for us now, showing off another of the great singers to have worked with them. Tell us about this.
One of the singers you're going to hear next is Ivan Ivanovich Savchuk. He was in the tradition of Lemeshev, Georgy Vinogradov. They were both favourites, and Polotskov, both all favourites of Stalin, who liked the gorgeous high tenor. He had very good musical taste. When you hear Savchuk, you will hear a very beautiful sound. Alongside him is the ensemble's only basso profundo. At the time, there were 10 of them in the world. Fyodorov used to joke that before a performance he would soak his feet in cold water in order to give himself a cold and improve his beautiful voice. Now, performers do love to tell stories, but he did have a beautiful voice.
Bandura. Vladimir Fyodorov was the owner of that incredible bass voice. I'm not sure if he had a cold whilst he was singing there, but absolutely amazing. Singing alongside tenor Ivan Savchuk and the Alexandrov Ensemble. The conductor Boris Alexandrov, who continued the dynasty from his father right through to his retirement in 1987. Linda, I may be wrong, but listening to that, I get a sense of the spiritual voice behind the ensemble. Not something I expected, really.
No, and Boris used to joke when they asked how on earth do they get that discipline, how on earth do they achieve that. He said he used to march them up and down in the road outside the studio and get them exhausted, square bash them and so on. In fact, what he did was to work them to the wall. He would exhaust them. If they'd been women, they would have cried until they could sing no more. And then they would get the second wind, and it was in the second wind that they could relax, they would stop the conscious control of the sound. Instinctive control would come through, and that would allow any spiritual feeling, if you like, to come through the sound. That was the trick, how they did it. That was what got him up in the morning, and that was how he achieved his great moments.
Now, Linda, we've heard a lot of what sounds like quite earnest singing to our Western ears, I suppose, but I think you've brought something along which shows they like to turn their hands to a bit of comedy too, yeah?
Ah, yes. Now, Boris Alexandrov was a wit. He was a joker. You're going to hear the courageous Don Cossacks, which in Russian the title means young lads or good boys. It's a traditional Don Cossack song praising the exploits of the Russian soldiers who routed Napoleon's army in 1812. That is what they usually sang. But when they came to the Albert Hall in 1963, Boris's grand entrance was this, but he'd built it up into a pastiche of our London Scots Guards band and also of our UK football songs. You'll hear them roaring in the stands, and you'll also hear the clash of the cymbals.
Молодцы!
An outrageous tribute from the Alexandrov Ensemble to the courageous Don Cossacks who famously routed Napoleon's army back in 1812. John Riley, I'm fascinated to know how the Soviets might have seen the role of the group, especially when they were touring with pieces like that in the 1960s. Was it the subtle combination of cultural peacemaking and warmongering at the same time?
Well, I suppose, yes, that was one of the things that the Soviet state, at many points in its history, wanted to promote. The idea that it was, on one hand, a very strong country, but at the same time that they wanted peace. They had this desire for peace. So those two things went hand in hand. You know, it's not to say that the ensemble was nothing but a propaganda arm of the state. You know, a lot of their repertoire was popular songs, folk songs, classical music, but there was a definite undertow in some of the songs that they chose, and to be honest, those were very popular songs as well, songs by composers like Blanter and the Pokras brothers and Dunayevsky. These were very popular wartime songs which retained their popularity after the war. And so it was very natural that the ensemble should take those into their repertoire.
Because the Soviets put a big resource into the group, especially during the Second World War, when they played a vital role, is that right?
Yes, they were oiked straight into the war. People who joined the army, who could also sing, were put straight in it. We had Viktor Nikitin, who, when he sang in the trenches, it is said that the Germans stopped shooting. They also said that about Evgeny Belyaev, so we have the same story about the two of them. Yes, they were very much part of supporting the soldiers at the front.
They apparently gave something like 1,500 performances during the war. Incredible amount of performances.
They had very long tours, very exhausting, and if you look at the pictures, you can see that they were certainly not fed any more than the people around them. They're thin.
And they were vital, of course, in motivating everyday people during the war as well, weren't they?
Yes, you're talking about the Sacred War, which was the choral music composed by Alexander Vasilyevich in June 1941, when the Wehrmacht invaded the USSR. It is quite frightening to listen to. That first recording is the only one which is like that. It captures the moment. It has been performed regularly ever since, and it has never sounded the same again.
The incredible voices of the Red Army Choir in that call to action for the Soviet people's sacred war. We heard the choir there in full wartime mode, if you like. What happened after the war? I guess a real change of role for them.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to remember about the choir is that although they existed, obviously, during the Soviet period, part of their reason for being was continuity. They were drawing on old pre-Soviet Russian techniques and styles of singing and performing. And in a sense, part of their role was to underline that continuity, that the Soviet Union was fighting not just for the Soviet Union itself, but for the continuity of its history and its culture and its lifestyle.
Of course, they were not one culture, but hundreds and thousands of cultures. You had Ukraine, you had Siberia, you had the Russians, who were considered different from everyone else. When the choristers and the soloists came to Moscow, they were all forced to learn to speak Russian in exactly the same way, so that they sang as one. Stalin wanted them to have balalaikas because he wanted them to feel that they all had one culture, which was Russian.
Well, I suppose they had to adapt their repertoire too. John, you've picked out one of the classical pieces they adopted, haven't you, for us to listen to next?
Yes, they, as I said, they had a huge range of repertoire from traditional real folk songs, if you like the Song of the Volga Boatman and In a Field Stood a Birch Tree, and then the kind of 19th century pseudo-folk songs like Dark Eyes and Suliko, which of course was Stalin's favourite song, apparently. And then they also did classical songs, so they did Kamarinskaya by Glinka, and choruses from Western operas, so they would do the Soldier's Chorus from Faust, Va Pensiero from Nabucco, but they also did adaptations of solo songs. So this is a song by Glinka from 1840. We just heard Echelon, which is one of those railway songs. The Soviet Union was obsessed by railways. It was one of their great achievements, one of Russia's great achievements, to build these railways throughout the country. It was an expression of their forward-looking technology and their modernism. So this song was written by Glinka in 1840, and it's possibly the first ever song about a railway. It's called the Song of the Road. It's a very fast kind of patter song, almost. It gives a real sense of the exhilaration of a train journey. I think this is amazing because it's astonishing enough to hear a solo singer perform something so quickly. To hear an ensemble of the size of the Red Army Ensemble perform something so fast and so accurately is quite astonishing.
Надежда, часы
like a choral tongue twister, the pattering voices of the Red Army Choir there with that song by Glinka. And now, this is a question to both of you, really. We've talked quite a bit during our time together about the discipline involved in being in the Red Army Choir, but was it actually fun to be a member of the choir?
Well, they couldn't leave. If they wanted or needed to leave, they were in the army. They had to go and get a docket from Boris Alexandrovich. Otherwise, they had to jolly well stay there. Some people did play a few tricks in order to get themselves into trouble in order to be able to leave. But almost all of the time, that just didn't happen. They were extremely proud to be there. They're Russians, they were passionate, they were artists. Yes, they did almost come to blows occasionally, but for 5 minutes, and after that they would hug each other. It was a passionate time for them, I think, and a very exciting time.
And John, what about the place for the choir now? Do you think they've managed to find a new role in the new Russia?
Well, I think the period, well, for the entire country, the period around and just after Perestroika was obviously very difficult. And the ensemble had a rather unusual time, I think, in the years immediately after the Perestroika. So they ended up performing Roger Waters' concept album The Wall in Berlin in 1990. Then they hooked up with the Finnish film director Kaurismäki and did concerts and which led to an appearance on the MTV Awards.
Right.
And in a sense, I think there was a danger of the choir becoming one of these kind of kitsch manifestations of Soviet history. I think actually they've managed to power through that, and again, simply that sense of dogged determination and continuity has actually seen them through that period.
Linda, we hear of funding pressures from the Russian government now. Where do you see the ensemble going in the coming years?
Well, at the end of last year, they thought they were going to close down. In January this year, the Ministry of Defence, so I understand, decided to cut down the number of the choir to really the young, untrained boys. They sacked all the experienced singers, the soloists of the choir. They are the ones like Fyodorov, who only had a phrase to sing. They sacked the soloists of the ensemble, like the great Vadim Ananyev, Vasily Gava, sacked the lot. They're now still singing for them, but as guest singers. They still exist. They can still put on an enormous show because they have enough clout to bring those singers back. So they're still there, but under a different funding, under a different situation. Their director is Leonid Kharitonov, who is just as skilled as the Alexandrovs were. Evgeny Alexandrov, the son of Boris, is still there. It's still, in a sense, the same.
Well, thank you, both of you, for sharing your obvious love for the Red Army Choir. It's been fascinating and really good to talk to you, so thank you very much, Linda, and to you as well, John.
Thank you.
We're going to finish with one of the all-time great pieces in the choir's repertoire. This is a setting by the group's founder, Alexander Alexandrov, of a lament for the Nazi occupation of their Ukraine, leading to an ecstatic celebration of their liberation. What a sound! The combined voices and instruments of the Alexandrov Ensemble, with that Ukrainian poem by Alexander Alexandrov, and conducted by his son and successor as director of the group, Boris Alexandrov. And while we all recover from that, it's a good moment to say that you're listening to The Choir with me, Ala Jones, here on BBC Radio 3.